Let's go over an if statement example. So here I have a prompt. It says, write a program that takes in 3 numbers from a user as an array and determines which number is the largest. If I go over to MATLAB and I just start by taking in 3 numbers from a user, I would say x equals input, enter in 3 numbers. They can enter them in as an array, so as x1, x2, x3. So when the user enters these numbers in, and I ran my code, they would literally enter in 1, 2, 3, and then x would store an array of numbers. Okay, so let's say I have an array of numbers, 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to go ahead and determine which one is the largest. So if we think about writing if statements, if we think about writing branching statements, we want to start by figuring out how many paths do we have. So number of paths. So for this one, I have 3 options. I also call the paths options. So my option number 1 is number 1 is the largest. Option number 2 is if number 2 is the largest. And option number 3 is if number 3 is the largest. Those are my 3 options, 3 paths for this problem. Okay, and then we need to figure out when each option occurs. So number 1 is the largest when number 1 is greater than number 2 and number 1 is greater than number 3. Okay. Number 2 is the largest when number 2 is greater than number 1 and greater than number 3. Let me rewrite that. So 1 is greater than 2, 1 is greater than 3, 2 is greater than 1, and 2 is greater than 3, and then 3 is greater than 1, and 3 is greater than 2. Or this is my default. So if it's not 1 and it's not 2, 3 is the largest. Or when not 1 and not 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this in an if statement. I have it planned out. Let's write this in an if statement. So to do an if, I start with the keyword if. For this one, I have 3 options. So I'm going to do an if, an else if, and an else. This is one of the ways we can write this if statement. So if my first option, so here if number 1 is the largest. That occurs if x1 is greater than x2 and x1 is greater than x3. So that's my first option. I can go ahead and display fprintf %d is the largest. I'll do a %.0f. I find that happens best when displaying integers. We could also do 0.2f. We don't know if they're going to be integers. Okay, that's my first option. Number 1 is the largest. Second option, num2 is the largest. Or the second number in my array. Okay, so I write that as x2 is greater than x1 and x2 is greater than x3. That would be fprintf %.2f is the largest. And then my last option is if number 3 is the largest. And there we go. Okay, I don't take into account equals to, so what if 2 numbers are equals? So I'll go ahead and add equals in here. We'll see what that does. There we go. I have an if statement. Here's option 1, option 2, option 3. Whenever we write if statements, we want to go ahead and run our code. We want to test it with all options. So I'm going to go ahead and run my code. So let's say I have 1, 2, 3. It should tell me 3 is the largest because number 3 is the largest. Okay, if we go ahead and run it again, let's run it with 2, 4, and 1. So here it tells me 4 is the largest, so it picks the middle one. Then I can run it again. Let's say 10, 9, 8. Gave me 10 as the largest. I can go ahead and check for those edge cases. What happens if I have 2, 4, and 2? It says 4 is the largest, which makes sense. I ran the wrong test case. So what happens if I have 2, 2, and 1? It tells me 2 is the largest. What if they're all the same? 2 is the largest. So it really just depends on what you're printing out. If we're trying to see which one is the largest, if we want to figure out the largest number, this works fine. If we want to figure out if it's index 1, 2, or 3, then we might have to do some other code. But if we're just printing out the largest number, this works. Another thing to mention is you don't want to have redundancies in your code, so I could just say max equals x1 here and print out the max down here. So replace all of these with max. So we're seeing that there's lots of different ways that we can start to design our code and design our programs. This will work exactly the same way. It would also work if I had a third else if x3 is greater than or equal to x1 and x3 is greater than or equal to x2. That would also work. So we see there's lots of different options of ways that we can write our code now. But this is a review of an if statement.